There has been much progress in encouraging women and children affected by gender-based violence to come forward and report their stories of abuse. However, in many instances, these acts of abuse and violence are witnessed by people living in the same home or next door and within communities. Many bystanders don't react to gender-based violence for a variety of reasons: familiarity, fear, ambivalence. This unfortunately further empowers the perpetrators and leaves victims feeling the opposite, disempowered. And Githuku-Shongwe from the UN Women Multi-Country Office joins us now to talk about bystanderism. Good to have you, Anne. Thanks. Welcome.
Good morning, Leanne. Thank you.
Quite an interesting term, bystanderism. And I mean, I suppose this is kind of loosely defined as a person who basically witnesses something but does nothing about gender-based violence. Is that a good understanding of what bystanderism is?
Absolutely, Leanne. I think one of the biggest problems we have, and the reason that we see this pandemic so unabated, is the fact that it's been so normalized. We know and expect violence now. We expect that, in fact, we find many mothers who say to their daughters that, you know, I was abused, expect to be abused. So this is so normalized in our community, and citizens stand by and watch wherever they are. This happens in workplaces, it happens in public spaces, it happens in families, it happens everywhere, where we basically stand by, bystanderism, and watch as a loved one goes through such an experience. We have been doing a study. We conducted a study with the UNDP and different partners in South Africa, and found that this is very, very common. That you see, whether it's in the workplace. So violence and harassment is prevalent in the workplace. So in the workplace, we know who's being violated. We know who the violator is. But for fear of reprisal, of victimization, we say nothing. This is the same case in the churches. We have a big initiative on faith, with faith communities, and we're finding in that platform that there has been abuse. They know who the abuser is. It might even be the pastor or the priest or whoever, the imam and the leader of that church. But people stand by and watch and witness as this happens and say nothing about it. Very often for fear that the perpetrator might turn it on themselves as well.
And this is the reality. I mean, this is unfortunately the reality of so many people and communities where they live in fear and they are far too scared to speak out. So they'd rather just live in silence and allow it to continue. I mean, there's also issues where certain cultures actually see interfering in domestic matters of another person's home as extremely disrespectful and feel that the partners may actually or should solve the issues themselves. It's such a fine line as to when to step in and when to not in terms of reporting the event. I mean, what does one do?
Well, I think what has become very clear for us is that the reason that we have violence at the levels that we have is because of the normalization in society, as I said earlier. And so one of the things that we saw, and I'll just give you a very good example that we have, there's an initiative that we have called the He for She Taverns. We work with the Catholic Church. It's a social justice program, justice and peace program of the Catholic Church. And they work with men in taverns in Klerksdorp and in the Eastern Cape and different parts of the country. There was a particular case in Klerksdorp of a case of a young woman, Nombo, that was not resolved for a while. She had been murdered. Her grandmother was on the lookout, searching around, asking the church leaders help. And turns out that the tavern owners actually knew about this case. They knew this woman and they knew her lover or her partner. And so they actually followed this case. And the tavern owners with the Father Stan and the community in Klerksdorp followed this case. And with that active bystanderism, they actually managed to get that case to court. They managed to walk that case all the way through and got justice. The man right now, Tsepo, is behind bars for life. But it took active bystanderism. I think the big lesson from this example is that you don't have to do it on your own. If you have fear of reprisal, one, you can report anonymously. The second thing is that you can actually partner with different organizations, and there are many NGOs who do this in the communities. I think, Leanne, one of the things that we have lost, if you look at the history of fighting apartheid in this country, the streets belonged to, there was active active engagement on the street. So every street, every ward, every community was accounted for. We have a church in every community in this country, whether it's a Christian church or an Islamic church. There is some faith institution there on the street. So you can always go to the faith institution, or you can go to local NGOs. So we need to know who are the community organizations around us, so that you don't have to individually try to take this case up. You can then, go together with a group so that you've got some protection. But we cannot continue with this kind of practice where you don't report. We had a horrendous incident during the lockdown of a woman in the Eastern Cape who shared with her cousin, who was in another province, scars across her body, but was fearful to report the case. And through her cousin and NGOs were able to mobilize and get her out of that house because she was going to get killed.
And there are always signs. There are always signs. This is something that we need to constantly be vigilant of, because sometimes, people can't speak for themselves and they need somebody to actually step in and help them. But again, I just emphasize, and it seems to be a worrying trend that, there's that saying that snitches get snitches, or snitches, let me try this again, snitches get stitches, a bit of a tongue tie, and that no one is actually perfect. Some people may feel that if they report gender-based violence issues to the authorities, that their standing in the community will deteriorate and they may be left ostracized. Even in rural communities, everyone knows everyone and their business. Police, nurses, social workers are often no stranger to being victims as well, and may well feel that a person in authority may dismiss their case to protect the perpetrator. These are tough circumstances.
They are, but I think that we're beginning to see this turn around, and a lot of the community work that's happening, and that's why community engagement is the key. Being able to ensure that there is, we have community policing structures in our different communities. Leanne, I don't know where you live, but I'm sure there's some kind of WhatsApp group or some kind of community watch that you have. Yeah. This is what we need to set up. Every community has to have some kind of community watch group, because without doing that, the street does not belong to us. The perpetrators, the criminals have full control over the streets. And so there's a lot of frustration, but as you're saying, it's whispered in the corners because we know who the perpetrators are. And so the key thing is to provide anonymous channels. So for those who fear for their lives are able to report through those channels, or there is some kind of community structure to support it. And I will say that this is happening in workplaces. Violence and harassment in the workplace is rife. And so one of the big things we're calling on, and this year the ILO has a new convention since 2019 on violence and harassment in the workplace. It is the same thing, that there has to be a systematic way in which reporting is taking place. Yeah. So there has been lots of work that we're doing. And I have to say that the National Strategic Plan on violence against women and girls in this country has a full section on prevention and social cohesion, and it points to the fact that communities need to take this into control. Now, we have a big group, Rapid Results Program Initiative in the Eastern Cape, and it is amazing that there's a traditional leader in that group. There is a police commissioner, commander of police in that group, and they are reporting cases and sharing the cases on a daily basis and resolving these cases all the time. So I don't think that communities don't want to resolve it. I don't think the fear of reprisal is so great that no one wants to take action. I think the problem has been, how do we do this? And we've developed some tools that we're calling, 10 things men can do, 10 things men of faith can do, 10 things, so that you actually have steps and numbers that you can use to be able to make these calls. Leanne, unless we get into this space, we will not resolve this issue of violence in this country, because it is at the community level that we have to resolve it. And the police are the same. Yeah. The police send you back saying that, it's a domestic matter. Yeah. So there is training going on with the police to say this is not a domestic matter. Every single case that is reported has to be dealt with the full merit of how it was presented to you.
Yeah, sensitivity. And we also need sensitivity around these issues as well. My fear sometimes is that we speak so much about it that we're actually getting GBV fatigue, if there's something out there called that. We're always talking about COVID fatigue, where we do the countdown of how many people have gotten coronavirus and the lockdown, and everybody just got sick and tired of hearing about it. It even it surprises me, and I often speak to this, that there are such horrific incidences every day, everywhere we turn in this country, and it doesn't even make the news. That actually scares me, is that when we've become such a lawless society and become almost, in other countries we would come to a dead standstill, as a story we're running in the news this morning. Absolutely. That a father, a suspect has gone missing. I mustn't put details to it because we're still trying to investigate it, but there's a 42-year-old woman and 5 children aged between 6 months and 10 years old that have been hacked to death, and the father is missing. Now, that makes the news, but there have to be like 5 victims. If there's anything less than that, it doesn't really even make the news. What does this tell you about our society?
Yeah, well, Leanne, one of the big things that, you keep hearing the conversation about patriarchy. I mean, in truth, COVID impacts all of us, men and women alike. So the power, there is some power story here. And we should talk to the media as well. Why is this not a story for the media? Why is it that every single day? And, this is work that we're doing. We have a campaign called Step It Up for the media. Why is it that we don't have as much attention on the media as we do? With COVID-19, we're reporting the statistics every single day.
And we still do.
Yeah, every single day. If we did this with gender-based violence, even though we roll our eyes around it, at least that it tells us that, number one, we're tracking the data. For instance, the police minister announced the 30 hotspots. But once he announced the 30 hotspots, we've barely talked again about that. We should be giving full attention to those 30 hotspots and saying, okay, we know that Umlazi, Mtata, Mamelodi, these are hotspots in this country. What's going on there? Have we begun to change the culture? Are we putting visible policing in that space? Are we looking at the NGOs that are in that space to make sure that everybody in that area knows what to do? So hotspot responses, in the way that we've been doing it with COVID-19, is the way in which we need to act. And so part of the normalization is what is worrying. But this bystanderism study is really to start saying that, you are complicit if you don't stand up and say something.
Yeah.
And there needs to be some way in which you're held responsible for being a bystander and being complicit. That happens when you observe other criminal, if you observe a homicide and say nothing about it, in you go. So why not with violence against women and girls? And so this is one of the things that needs to happen.
I mean, I think that's a starting point, at least, because, as we say, there's a lot of education, there's a lot more that needs to be done. Just finally, Anne, as I wrap up with you, I mean, 16 days of no violence against women and children. Obviously, it's a great initiative, and we support it, and we know that it's important, but there is criticism that, suddenly in the 16 days, that's what we talk about, and then it disappears. And yes, that story will head the bulletin in the 16 days, but thereafter, what happens?
Well, the truth is, this is a United Nations global, 25th of November is the International Day of No Violence Against Women. We have International Day for Children. We have International Day for Human Rights. We have this is what we do at the United Nations, is to draw attention to a particular issue on a particular day. But this 16 days happens between the International Day of No Violence Against Women and the International Human Rights Day. So the truth of it is that it's an opportunity to stop and take account. But it doesn't mean that we've stopped and are not doing anything the rest of the year. South Africa is constantly talking about 365 days. Yeah. But it is important for us to use this period and take advantage of the fact that we have attention on this issue. And that's what the international days are by the United Nations. So this is not a South African, unique to South Africa. It's happening everywhere in the world. This year, the theme is fund, respond, prevent, collect. And we've been talking a lot about the fact that the cost of violence to this economy is estimated, if it's at about 2% of the GDP, we estimate that that's nearly 100 billion rand that we lose because of violence in this country. And so it is everybody's business. As we think about economic recovery from COVID, we have to think about how do we invest in ensuring that violence does not continue to deplete us and deplete the economy. We need to look at prevention, and this bystanderism is about that. How do we ensure that no case happens under our watch in every institution that we run?
All right.
So this is an important event.
We have to leave it there, and such an important discussion. Thanks for being with us. And Githuku-Shongwe is from the UN Women, talking to us about this term bystanderism, which is when people witness GBV and they do nothing about it. All right, that's where we leave you for today.
Yeah, lots of sober conversation, but that's unfortunately all we have time for.